The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. When Jesus heard that Herod had beheaded John the Baptist, he withdrew in a boat to a deserted place by himself. But when the crowds heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, Jesus saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them and cured their sick. When it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves." Jesus said to them, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They replied, "We have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then Jesus ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. The Gospel of the Lord. Our hearts are restless, O Lord, until they rest in you. This very famous quote from St. Augustine, I think, fits beautifully with our readings today, and even more resonates with the truth of the situation in which we find ourselves nowadays. Over the past 4 months, through the pandemic, we were forced in a certain way to slow down, to stop running around frantically. The sudden grinding to a halt may have been a blessing for some, a way to improve family values or increasing prayer life. But it may also have uncovered a certain restlessness in our hearts. At least it did for me. A restlessness, a hunger, a thirst, a desire for more than what's offered by the world. Have you also experienced this? In the gospel today, Jesus encounters this profound longing and hunger in the crowds, in those who are sick, and those who are hungry, and those who long for more. And Jesus is not indifferent to the crowd. In fact, he's not indifferent to each and every woman in that crowd. He had compassion for them, the gospel says. But much more than compassion, Jesus was deeply moved to the core. The word that's used in Greek indicates that when Jesus saw the crowd, when he saw their sickness, his guts, his heart was moved viscerally with pity and with love, moved to give of himself to them, moved to cure their sick. But even after the miraculous curing of the sick, we read that the disciples wanted the crowds who still hungered for more. They wanted the crowds to be sent away. The disciples' reason was very practical. They had 5 loaves and 2 fish, and they knew that that wasn't enough for themselves, let alone to feed 5,000 plus people. The disciples wanted each person in that crowd to go away and fend for themselves, to satisfy their hunger somewhere else. But Jesus essentially says, "No, let them come to me. I will feed them." And this miracle of the multiplication of the loaves is essentially a foreshadowing of the miracle that will take place on this altar, the miracle of the Eucharist. Jesus is the one who satisfies our hunger, our deepest and innermost hunger. Even now, Jesus can't stand to see us labor continually, running around for that which does not satisfy us. He can't stand seeing us attempting constantly to fend for ourselves without him, without his help. Come to me, he says, I will feed you. Moved with pity, Jesus gives of himself. He gives his very self in the Eucharist. Yes, Jesus is moved to the core out of love for you and for me, and makes himself present in the Eucharist for you in your life. When you receive him in the Eucharist, Jesus comes intimately into your heart, into your life. It's almost as if the night of the Last Supper, when he instituted the Eucharist, Jesus thought of you. Jesus thought of me. And not wanting us to fend for ourselves, not wanting us to remain unsatisfied and restless and isolated from him, he said, "Take and eat. This is my body." He wants to remain with you when you receive him, long after you leave these doors, throughout the whole week. Jesus wants to dwell into our hearts, feeding us with his presence, his real presence, the only presence that truly satisfies our deepest and innermost longings of the heart.